From Dunn Brothers, welcome to Inside Minneapolis.
Hello and welcome to Inside Minneapolis. I'm Phill Lindsay. And we're standing here in the Dunn Brothers Coffee House at 2nd Street and 3rd Avenue along the riverfront in downtown Minneapolis. And on this edition we're going to be taking a look at a lot of the projects that are going on here in this part of town. My first guest is Dave Carland. He's with CSM Corporation, and he'll be telling us specifically about what's going on along the Milwaukee Depot site. Some very interesting project happening here. And then we'll be talking with other people about the history of the area, urban design opportunities, and we'll get a view from somebody who's a resident and works in the downtown area. But first, let's go out on location and see what's happening on this site along the Milwaukee Depot. Stay tuned. So they're going to give me a sign here.
Okay.
And welcome back. You're watching Inside Minneapolis, and I'm Phill Lindsay. And with me is a gentleman who's going to talk about the project that's going on in the area that you just saw in that location package. It's the Milwaukee Depot project, and Dave Carland is with CSM Corporation. We'll talk a little bit about CSM in a minute, but could you just outline for our viewers what this significant project is you're working on here at really the corner of 3rd Avenue in Washington?
Sure. We're talking about the historical Milwaukee Road Depot, and primary objective for the redevelopment, first of all, was to facilitate the historical restoration of the facility, which is primarily three components. Number one is the depot itself, which had the administrative offices and the waiting facilities for the passenger terminal. The midway, which basically served as an entryway to the shed, and the shed was the covered area where the passenger trains pulled into for loading. So that's the existing historical component of the project. Beyond that, we've added three other functions. Number one, a residence inn by Marriott that'll be 134 rooms. A courtyard by Marriott, which will be 204 rooms. And then below ground, we have 2 levels of parking consisting of 550 parking stalls.
Which is a nice solution, I might say, to parking. I mean, it's in between all of these, so it's really not visible from the street.
That was part of the design standard for the project, that it have this urban edge. You can see the depot, obviously, and the shed stay where they are, and they're up against Washington Avenue. And the hotel buildings are back against 2nd Street, up against the street, and the parking is concealed on the interior.
And we should mention that where you and I are sitting at this moment as we're talking is in the old freight house,
Exactly.
which is still part of the terrain here.
Correct?
Yeah, and that, of course, has been a Dunn Brothers for a few years now and stuff
Right.
like that. The CSM, the corporation that's putting this together, what is it? What is your mission as a company?
Well, we're a real estate development company. We're 25-year-old. We're St. Paul based. About half of our portfolio is within the Twin Cities, and the remaining half is national, primarily points west of here.
And one of the facts about CSM is that you not only develop it, you don't necessarily then turn around and sell that off into the marketplace. You continue to own it and manage it then.
Yeah, that's correct. That differentiates ourselves from a lot of our competitors, is that we build to own and manage and hold for the long term.
And it bespeaks sort of an investment you make then in the communities that you're participating in.
Exactly. We try to build a little more quality in the project, and that we know that we're going to have to deal with it, 5, 10, 20 years down the road.
Well, and given some of the complications that I know this site provided to you, what attracted you to this area and to this specific project as you're sitting around in your drawing rooms there over at CSM headquarters?
Sure. Well, we're all Minneapolis people. I have I think 40 of my 41 years have been in Minneapolis. Gary Holmes, who's our principal and owner, is an old Southwest High graduate and lives in Minneapolis. So there was that connection. There was a lot of sentiment and memories from our parents and grandparents that were involved. But really primarily we were looking for a location for a Marriott Courtyard downtown. We develop a lot of Marriott product, and although Marriott's got the city center, had a couple other brands, the Residence Inn and the Courtyard, that they want to represent downtown. So it was our search for a Marriott Courtyard
kind of drove that
really
decision.
that really found its way to
and most
to
of our
the
viewers
depot.
probably know that where you're doing this is really kind of in between the central business district and our riverfront.
Exactly.
So who are you hoping will come and make use of what you're putting in here?
Well, we'll have two groups. I mean, we the downtown business folk, of course. Maybe an individual that's more comfortable driving to a location than somebody that would maybe be at the Marriott City Center downtown, where you'd maybe have to go by cab.
Yeah.
But also we think we can attract a good weekend business, families.
You've got a couple features that
Sure.
we'll into that. Do you want to
Sure.
describe them?
Sure. Well, within the Marriott itself, there's a water park feature, which is this two-story glass element that you see, and that's going to have several different swimming pools. It'll have the wading pools. It'll have the spas, but it'll also have some of the fun water features that you maybe associate with Wisconsin Dells, the water hoses, the fountains, the giant water buckets. So it'll be a kind of place where a family could, on a day like this, could, spend
Get away
some
from the
time
elements and still get wet, maybe.
Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly.
What's the timeline?
Well, the timeline is we're obviously under construction, as you can tell by the giant hole out there.
Yeah.
We're doing the restoration of the shed and the depot first. That'll be complete about a year from today. Parking structure will follow probably in February of 2001. The Residence Inn will be early spring of 2001, and the Courtyard will be early summer of 2001. So the whole project will be complete and up and running inside of 18 months.
Yeah, a year and a half from about right now.
Right.
Very impressive.
Right.
And one thing we haven't mentioned specifically is what's going to be going on underneath the shed.
I was hoping you'd ask.
And I'm thinking a lot of our viewers are going to be just thrilled to hear what's going to happen there.
Yeah. The shed was actually the biggest challenge of this project. There were all kinds of uses for the depot, and we're actually talking to several restaurant operators, and it's really a magnificent space, and we knew we could find somebody for that. Problem with the shed is it's very long, it's very high. Front's right up on Washington Avenue, so there's a noise element.
That's true. It's a good couple blocks long.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. We looked at a whole bunch of concepts, from casinos to to bowling alleys to bazaars, open markets.
Really?
What we arrived on was an ice skating rink, and we initially had looked at a couple of hockey rinks and had determined that really the market for hockey is somewhat specialized and frankly oversaturated. But we did find a niche of skaters that were really underserved, we thought, in the Twin Cities, and that's figure skating community.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a facility that's going to be oriented toward figure skating and open skating.
For the general public to some degree.
General public, about half of the time will be utilized by the figure skating clubs in town, and that's a a very active community, and they really, up until now, played second fiddle to the hockey group.
Good point.
So
I know of at least one ice ballet theater in town that's been looking for the appropriate place.
Yeah,
so
they tend to get bounced around, and
Yeah.
they get kind of the time that's left over when the hockey folk don't want
Yeah.
to use it. This facility, for example, it won't have the traditional dasher boards and plexiglass that you'd associate with a hockey rink. They'll just have a rail so that if people are involved in open skating or people are viewing the figure skating, they're not going to have to look over the plexiglass to see the action, or if they want to mingle with somebody that's not skating, they're not going to have this barrier between them.
Well, now, Dave, given the nature of this shed here, will folks that are driving along Washington be able to look in and see some of this activity?
Right. That's really, I think, one of the beauties of the design is this will all be a glass front there that'll actually go behind the existing trellis work, so that if you're driving down Washington Avenue, you'll be at eye level with the skating activity. And on the same note, if you're inside skating, you'll be able to look out at the traffic and beyond at the
That's
at,
great
at the
animation
skyline.
of a key corner here, really, a key intersection of
which is
Minneapolis.
right, which is really in contrast to what we saw with a lot of the open skating facilities. They tended to be metal pole barns in the suburbs,
Yeah.
and it would be fun for people who want to skate, but it really isn't much an event. Here we think people can come downtown, they can eat, they can do a skating session and maybe shop or
Head into the shopping district, or maybe head over to the river for some of the historical things over there, and
Right.
and call this sort of home for the time they're there. Very exciting.
Exactly.
Now, any project of this scale in a city, I would guess in most cities, faces some challenges. And I
Right.
know, among others, there have been some special project considerations here. Do you want to just outline a couple a couple of hurdles you had to get over?
Well, I mean, the major challenge, of course, was finding some kind of economically viable way to utilize the shed and the depot. I mean, the practical reality of it is the highest and best use for this real estate was to tear it down and do an office building or something else, which obviously wasn't an alternative. So, number one challenge was to find an economical way to reuse the property, but there were also significant environmental impacts, based on 100 years of rail use that we had to work through. There was a very significant political process, layers and layers of approvals.
Yeah, I think anybody that read any of the papers here in the Twin Cities while you guys were putting this together, from labor issues to reuse and all kinds of development concerns. But you worked through those problems.
We worked through it. It was about an 18-month process, and there were some...
Dave, from a developer's point of view, what do you think, once this project is completed, what do you think it will mean to this part of Minneapolis? Again, essentially that part of the sort of the east downtown between the central business district and the river.
Well,
what do you hope it will mean?
Well, we hope, number one, that it can be a bridge from the downtown core to the riverfront. We hope that it's going to be a destination, which this area lacks right now, so a reason for people to drive down to the riverfront and experience it.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. As an individual in the field, what is the most fun you get working on a project like this, or maybe any of the projects you work on, but this one just seems to be very interesting in and of itself?
Oh, it was great to learn about the history.
Yeah.
And probably the most rewarding part is to see it actually happen. You work, it's sometimes 2-3 years, and then it's, when the equipment shows up and the roof comes off.
When they start moving the dirt, I'll tell you, I mean, that was a go then. Yeah.
Right.
And you get to see
exactly.
something completed when it's all over.
Yeah, exactly.
Other plans, CSM, other big projects afoot that you can share with our viewers?
Well, we're working on at least one other historical restoration downtown. We've got a Marriott Town Place in the warehouse district.
Okay.
We're going to continue to do lodging products all over the country, and also doing retail, industrial, and all kinds of housing within the Twin Cities as a whole.
Sounds like you had a full plate.
Definitely.
All right, Dave Carland, thank you very much. Thanks for being on and sharing with us your great project here.
Great.
Well, we'll be back in a moment to talk a little bit about the history of this area, especially down along Washington Avenue as it comes over from about 35W over to 3rd Avenue in Dave's project here. But first, let's go meet a fellow, Larry Heinz, who can tell us a little bit in particular about some of the pollution remediation that Dave was just telling us about on this project. Stay tuned.
Well, primarily we had free product, which is actually oil, diesel fuel floating on top of the groundwater. And in order to mobilize that, because it has been there so long, we decided to use steam injection. So we installed a boiler just off the site a little bit, pump steam into the ground through injection wells. And then we have other wells in the area. We extract that free product because now it is more mobile because it's been heated up. Pump it back to our facility that we've got tanks, and we can separate the oil. There's obviously some water comes with it. And then we have a venting system installed, which is another series of wells to extract the vapors. Because the soil's been heated up so much, we've got vapors trapped in the soils, we can extract the soil. And we've pulled out approximately 40,000 gallons of free product, actual diesel fuel that's burnable, which is being reused in incinerators. Now, as the soil cools down, we have activated the natural occurring bacteria, and they are, in effect, eating the remaining carbon and byproducts of the petroleum that are trapped in the soil, and will eventually clean it up to virtually pristine.
Turn red.
It's my light. There we go. So. Well, thanks, Larry. That's always interesting to know actually what's going on inside Minneapolis. And my next guest is going to talk about some of the history, but let's remember our regular feature we do here on Inside Minneapolis is our What the Heck feature. So what you're going to be looking at here for a moment are the images that we'll go out on the street and ask some people, what the heck are these? Meanwhile, we've got Scott Anfinson here from the Minnesota Historical Society. Scott, thanks for being here.
Good to come, Phil.
And first of all, let's start just a little basically what you do. You have an archaeology background, a historian. What is your calling here in life?
Well, what I do for the Historical Society, I didn't plan in my education to do. I just got hired as a survey archaeologist back in the 70s for the Minnesota Historical Society, and then I took the job as the archaeologist for the State Historic Preservation Office in about 1990. I mean, you go through school and you plan, and well, I'm going to go dig sites and analyze the arrowheads and talk about prehistoric cultures. It doesn't work out that way. The two things that I'm sort of known for in recent years are the work I've done in the Minneapolis riverfront and the work I've done with shipwrecks in Minnesota. So that degree in prehistoric archaeology doesn't do me a lot of good when I'm dealing with shipwrecks and flour mills in the
Well,
Minneapolis
I've got to ask you, when you
riverfront.
talk about shipwrecks, are we talking shipwrecks elsewhere than Lake Superior?
Oh yeah, we studied all the inland rivers and lakes too, and Lake Superior too.
Oh,
We did
okay.
them both. But one of the things when I was sort of preparing to be on your show, I was looking under Washington Avenue on our index at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I found a shipwreck below the Washington Avenue Bridge. A tugboat actually ran into one of the piers and sunk there, and I found a photograph of a shipwreck right there on the Washington Avenue Bridge. So sometimes my fields overlap.
That's good, well, as they should.
Yeah,
That's
they
good.
should.
Now, let's broaden a little bit. You work for the Minnesota Historical Society, and of course they are, as you say, statewide. What has their role been, let's say in the last generation anyhow, here in the downtown Minneapolis area, the riverfront over towards the central business district?
Well, I personally got involved over here in the early 1980s when they were planning West River Parkway. And, you know, I was the county municipal highway archaeologist at that time, and plop, this set of plans landed on my desk and it says, here's West River Parkway through the heart of downtown Minneapolis. And I thought to myself, oh, there can't be any archaeological sites there because they're all been destroyed by the city. And then I mentally thumped myself a big one and realized, what is a city but a big archaeological site? And that's when I started realizing, oh my God, what am I getting in for here?
Opened up the horizon, yeah.
Months later and almost a divorce, you know, I was doing all this research and I got real intense about it as I do. And I got fascinated by the history of downtown Minneapolis, and I think we identified 100 different locations along the whole West River Parkway that could have archaeological potential. So that's how I got involved, was the West River Parkway project, and then we followed that through with some work. But you know, the Historical Society in the 1980s, when I first got involved here, really was not engaged in, I think, Minneapolis history much. We really didn't have a presence here. I mean, we had the Comstock House up in Moorhead, we had the Hill House over in St. Paul, we had our headquarters over in St. Paul. We had stuff scattered all over the state, but we did not have a property in Minneapolis. The biggest
Interesting.
city in the state,
Yeah.
we don't have a property here. So, you know, I kept, gee, this is really interesting, really interesting. Well, now, of course, we're very involved because we have plans just a little ways from us here for the burned out Washburn Mill. We hope to put a new interpretive center in there, and that's
Mill Ruins Park.
that's right.
Digs over
So
there.
I would say right now, Minneapolis is the center of our attention at the Historical Society.
Fascinating. Well, and we're glad you're here. And you brought some fascinating things for us to look at. I want to turn our attention, first of all, to a long artifact that you brought. It's beautiful in itself, but it also is great in helping tell the story about Washington Avenue. And again, to orient our viewers, basically from about 3rd Avenue, which is where we're sitting, down along the Milwaukee Depot site, all the way down, say, to the West Bank, or where 35W comes in there. Can you just walk us through, and I know our camera's going to get an image of this as we're talking about it. Can you kind of tell us what it is we're looking at, and then walk us along Washington Avenue there?
Sure. When I knew I was going to be on, and you said, well, Washington Avenue is really the focal point, although we're going to be talking about things around, I thought, well, how much do I really know about Washington Avenue? I've been focusing on the Mill District and the Gateway District with the Federal Reserve Bank project and the Hennepin Avenue Bridge project, but Washington Avenue itself, I thought, what did that look like 100 years ago? And I went into our collections, and we have a real nice artifact, as you say. It's an 1882 fold-out document that's basically an artist's rendition of everything from about 7th Avenue South, just past the Mill District here, all the way up to about 6th Avenue North or so, and it folds out, and it's very long. It's probably 20, 30 feet long when it all gets folded out.
It was like that Thousand Clowns thing, as you started
unfolding
it,
leaf
and
going
after leaf.
And I was kind of amazed, and I didn't have a table long enough, but I did fold it out over here, a little piece of it on your couch, just in the Mill District, and it's pretty fascinating.
Well, great. Why don't you just start us right at about, say, the Milwaukee Depot, and just tell us some of the things, sort of historically, that people would encounter. One thing that people don't always remember is that the Milwaukee Depot isn't the first depot that was along Washington Avenue.
No, actually, Washington Avenue was the sort of avenue of depots in the early days. Some of the earliest depots in the 1860s that were built in Minneapolis were really built. I think the first depot was probably on North Washington Avenue. But then there were several depots down here. The reason the whole Milwaukee Road complex that we're sitting next to is here is because the Minnesota Central in the 1860s basically said, we're going to build a railroad down to Minneapolis, and the city fathers say, we really want you to. We'll give you 5 square blocks of land and free water power if you'll come right into the heart by the Mill District.
Yeah.
It really was a big incentive, and this is a relic of that, early legislative attempt and Minneapolis attempt to get railroads to the heart of the city. They really needed them here. So this got laid out as a parcel by the Minnesota Central, and you can actually see on that view, there's probably still remnants of the Minnesota Central shops over in the Mill District on the far right of the picture over there. But eventually, the Minneapolis, that would be the Milwaukee, Chicago, and St. Paul, I think, came in here and built a really nice depot. I think in about 1878 that depot was built. Very nice Italian. It was right where the train shed is today.
Right, so that's a little bit east of the current depot site.
That's the reason it's there, is because when they tore that depot down at the turn of the century to build the new Milwaukee Road Depot, they wanted that depot still operating, so they actually built the new depot on the side of the turntable, and then once the depot was up and running, they tore down the old depot and put the train shed there.
Fascinating. I know that our researcher, Sherry Nolan, has gotten an old photo of that, so maybe we can show people that.
That was a gorgeous depot. Really nice architecture. I'm sure your next guest will compare the architecture of the current depot and the old depot, and I think the earlier one wins
Linda
out.
may have something to say about that. We'll ask her about that, sure. So it's a fascinating artifact you've got here, and why was something like that created? Just as a pictorial device?
They didn't, there were no video cameras in those days, so what you had to do when you wanted to get a big view of it, a panoramic view, was they really had to either take lots of photos and paste them together or hire an artist. The other thing you see a lot from that time is panoramic views, a bird's eye view. Now it's called a bird's eye view because airplanes weren't around, so they couldn't just send some up with a camera. So they had an artist imagine what it looked like from up in the sky looking down.
So it was imaginary, though. They weren't sending this artist up in a balloon.
Nope, and you can find lots of mistakes on those, and you always notice too is you can find out who commissioned them a lot of times by who is emphasized. Like when Pillsbury or Washburn Crosby wanted a view of the Mill District, their buildings were always
kind of the
bigger.
Focal point
they
there.
were bigger and they were prettier and nicer. Then all the buildings, which really were the same scale in real life, are sitting next door, but they're tiny.
That's interesting. Scott, you've been talking about the railroads, the relationship of the railroads to the river per se. There's a lot of commerce on the river too. How did that connect, and then what happened after that? Because the railroads aren't here today, by and large.
And the reason Minneapolis is here and the reason Minneapolis isn't a suburb of St. Paul is because of the waterfall. St. Paul was the head of river navigation because that's as far as the riverboats could get up the Mississippi River before the channel got too crowded with all the big blocks of stone that had fallen off the falls that had advanced up the river. So they got to St. Paul. And that was the mode of transportation of the day, was riverboats to St. Paul. So why do you jump to Minneapolis? John Stevens came here to start a farm community. You know, the guy
Agricultural.
he was totally agricultural. He even left town within a couple of years because Minneapolis was getting too big. It was turning into a manufacturing center.
Needed a little elbow room?
He did. He took off and founded the town of Glencoe in central Minnesota. So John was a little frustrated that it wasn't this little farming community.
Yeah.
But the reason it's here is because of the waterfall. And then when you got the logs coming down, I mean, it was perfect. The logs just float down the Mississippi. You saw them here, and then you float them down in the rafts. But how do you get, then when you start making flour, the big markets for flour are really out east.
Yeah.
Well, the river doesn't flow east. How do you get them out there? You need a railroad.
Okay.
So Minneapolis was desperate for railroads, and railroad after railroad after railroad came in here. Actually, at the height of the mill district, by the turn of the century, 4 separate railroads just served the mill district here. 4 separate companies. Some started by the mill owners themselves.
Okay. So really it was an
competition.
intermodal situation there. You can get some things down the river.
Yep.
But then you needed to get them onto the trains to send them out to the markets.
Ultimately, you had to get the wheat here, and because the big wheat growing areas are to the west,
Right.
and the big markets are to the east, the river worked well for logging.
Yeah.
Because all the forests are up north, and all the big markets are all the booming towns
on
along
down,
the Mississippi
yeah.
River.
Yeah.
Build those towns with that wood.
Fascinating.
But grain didn't work that way, and as grain became more important, you needed the railroads to get the grain from the west, and grind it at Minneapolis, and move it out east.
And for both of these purposes, or well, more than 2 actually, the river, the mills, the railroads, a lot of workers came to this part of
That's
the
right.
area.
That's right.
And then how did those folks that came here, how did they affect the development of Washington Avenue?
Well, Washington Avenue really became sort of I would have loved to have been here 100 years ago or a little earlier, because you'd have walked up and down and you'd have heard you'd heard German voices and Norwegian voices and Swedish voices, and especially the area up by Seven Corners at the other end of Washington Avenue where we are here. Really became a heart of Scandinavian settlement, and eventually got the name Snus Boulevard because of all the Norwegians chewing their tobacco up there.
Sure.
But there was actually an interesting, right down a little bit from us at about, about 10th or so south, an individual, very important individual, city father named Baird, built a huge building, and it was known as Baird's Block officially, and it was known as a tenement without the bad context of tenement. A tenement was just a place for a lot of different people to live, and it was huge. It was one of the biggest ever built in Minneapolis, and he made it for low-income immigrants. So a lot of the Norwegians and Swedes and Germans that came in lived in Baird's Block, and eventually it got known around town as Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark.
Because
Just
that's
'cause
where
who
it
was
was
there?
all these voices and all these people just coming in entry level, and it really gave them a start. And I think Larry Millett even talks about Baird's Block in his book.
Scott, we've
Lost
got
Twin
just
Cities.
about a minute left, and I know you brought some very interesting photos to share. If you could hold those
Sure,
up and
sure.
tell us what we're looking at.
I think the first one here is a view of them building the Washington Avenue Bridge. It's curious, well, where does Washington Avenue start and end? Well, it had to step across the river to get to the link to University Avenue, and this is in 1884. They're actually building, and you can see the down on the river flats down there.
Yep.
Those are some of that immigrant housing that weren't living in Baird's Block.
Sure.
They were squatters living right down the riverfront, and it was actually known as Swede Flats in the early days, and later became known as Bohemian Flats.
Bohemian Flats.
It was the Scandinavians that were there first.
Okay.
So that's an interesting view. This is one of my favorite views. This is from 1882, so it's the same year as that big drawing I have over there. And this is looking towards the university down Washington Avenue, and you can see the boardwalk. You can see the little Italianate depot, a little
here's
piece
the
of it
boardwalk
there.
here, yeah.
And you can see a horse-drawn streetcar going down the middle of the road.
Exactly. As you hold it, I'll point it out here. Maybe
Yep.
the camera can get in
and
there.
you can see the
Little
Minnesota
blurry.
Central shops over by the Mill District are over there. So that's kind of an interesting
back
view.
over that way.
And this is part of a panorama, of a 5-shot panorama. So that's kind of a neat view. The last view really shows the other end. It's a little bit down from us. And this was the Gateway Building, which was really the anchor in the center of the city. So Washington really radiated out north to the residential areas in North Minneapolis and into the commercial areas along the riverfront in Minneapolis. And the Gateway was sort of the start of that, heading north and heading south.
That's
so
a great
that's the old
image
Nicollet
there.
Hotel, the old Nicollet Hotel,
Yeah.
and the Gateway Building, which was then torn down for urban renewal, which I suppose is the subject of your next guests.
We're going to get into that. Scott Anfinson, thank you very much.
Sure, Phil.
Pleasure.
Good to be here.
We'll have to have you back.
All right.
Great. Well, we are indeed going to be back with Linda Mack from the Star Tribune. We're going to be talking about some of the urban design opportunities, the urban environment in this area. But first, let's hear from one of our hosts here at the Dunn Brothers Coffee Shop, Chris Eliers. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Chris Eliers. I'm one of the owners of Dunn Brothers Coffee. We're in one of our newest coffee houses located in the Industry Square part of Minneapolis, which is a part of the Milwaukee Road Depot project. We renovated this building back in 1998 with the understanding that there would be future development down here, and we wanted to get in on the early side of the development. In fact, the hotels are now being built at the Milwaukee Depot. and proving that we made the right decision. The freight house that we're in now used to be a storage area for incoming freight for the railroad, and there used to be a duplicate building that looked exactly like this one, and in between was a large warehouse. These were in fact offices. So we're happy to be in this part of town. We look forward to the development that's going on, and I think everybody in this part of town is happy that we're here serving them fresh coffee.
And I go on, so I'll interrupt our chat here.
Okay.
And I guess we're doing this new pan thing. This is kind of neat, though.
Yep,
My book
this
club
is a
came in
neat-
here once.
Oh,
Excuse
yeah.
me just a second. Sorry. And thanks, Chris. It's nice to be here at Dunn Brothers Coffee, a very nice place. I know my book club has made use of part of the space here, so it's a charming part of Minneapolis to come in and spend some time. With me now is a woman who covers development and architecture and the urban environment as her beat. Linda Mack with the Star Tribune. Nice to
Good
have
to
you on
see
the
you,
show.
Phil.
But let's be specific. How do you define your beat?
Well, the proper title is the urban landscape, reporter and commentator. So that's pretty broad, but it really has been focusing on urban design issues, development issues, architecture, historic preservation controversies. There is plenty of those.
Yes.
And suburban sprawl has become one of those big issues too.
No doubt, yeah. And then the counterpoint to what's going on in the suburban world with what's going on in a more densely populated inner city.
Right.
And one of the things I would just compliment you, because one of the things I like that you do in your writings is you give context usually. You can talk about the specifics,
Try to
but
do.
then we get a broader view of how it fits in, and that's why I was glad you could come and be on the show.
Well, that's my intent.
That's great. And as over our shoulders here, we have a map of downtown Minneapolis, and I just wanted our viewers to get a sense of, if you will, kind of what happens here, more or less along the government corridor, or 3rd Avenue here, sort of upriver or to the west and the north, is a very densely built environment. And at least in the recent generations, we've had a lot of surface parking, among other things, left over here. Of course, the Dome, Metrodome is over here. But as we were talking before the show started here, there's a lot of development going on here, and a lot is changing in what I might describe as downtown east. You just want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I see it as a real shift from the industrial past that Scott was talking about that shaped this area to a new present, which is a place to live and a neighborhood with cultural amenities like the future Guthrie.
Yeah.
And the housing, of course, is really hot. The North Star lofts and the condominiums going in, not far from here, down
just
by
down along the
Portland
river.
Avenue near the Stone Arch Bridge, as well as on the North Riverfront. Those were all, these railroad yards and mills that produced things, and now they're places for people to live. And the West River Parkway, with the walkways along it, has given it a pedestrian character. People can circumnavigate, and take a walk like they can around Lake of the Isles or Lake Harriet. So it begins to be more attractive as a neighborhood.
And you pointed out to me something that maybe a lot of folks don't remember, is that some of the earliest pioneers down along the river in the modern times they jumped the river.
Well, the first riverfront revival, you might call it, St. Anthony, Maine. Way back there. When was that? Early 70s.
Yeah. Seems like ancient history now.
Was very charming, but it jumped across the river, and so it had a disconnect with downtown. There wasn't any way to get there sort of after work or whatever. It had to be a destination, and that's River Place was the destination that ended up not being a destination.
Marketing.
And meantime, this land that is still surface parking lots was just lying really fallow.
Yeah.
And so would that have changed? I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. But of course, there were the many attempts for the Milwaukee Road Depot. I feel like I spent my whole career, covering the plans for the Milwaukee Road Depot. So it's really fun to see actual construction going on.
And you may remember better than I, but I think the city got hold of it because it came out of the Resolution Trust thing, which went back to some ownership that blew up with the savings and loan thing. And then as the city got hold of it, at least half a dozen different ideas have been floated for that.
Oh yeah, I think I alone may have written, 10 stories on the plans for the Milwaukee Road Depot, which have, you could do a whole program on that.
Yeah,
which have included a $400 million casino, and it was going to be the World Trade Center. I.M. Pei's son, Ting Pei, proposed that it was going to be the World Trade Center when that went to St. Paul.
Okay, so there was a discussion as to which city would get it. And
convention center, and then there was the Harry Worth plan, which was the entire riverfront with housing and ice rinks and huge towers and international marketplaces and so forth.
Interesting. Well, minus the huge towers and the marketplaces, some of that, the ice rinks.
We're going to have the ice rink.
The hotels that are coming in. What do you think of that? I mean, here we've got someone who spends time thinking about it and puts their opinions out in public. What do you think of the project that's happening with the depot itself?
It's fabulous.
You like it?
It's a great use for that space. They're going to have, the atrium, which is really quite intact, needs paint, needs cleanup.
Yeah.
But the garlands are still on the, high up on the ceiling and the cornices. I don't know if you've been in there.
I hadn't noticed some of those details. But
and the waiting rooms are still there, and the fireplace in the ladies' waiting room. Of course, the ladies and the gentlemen had to wait separately.
Yeah.
And so
we may balance that out.
Amazing, that so much is intact there.
Yeah.
So the atrium will be a restaurant, and then the waiting rooms will become private dining rooms. So that fits very nicely. And then upstairs, where there's this mezzanine where the railroad offices were, that will be suites. So kind of high-end rooms that will be connected to the hotel. And the hotel will not be built in the depot. There'll be a separate building for the Marriott courtyard, and then the Residence Inn.
Yeah, Dave Carland was showing us the model of that earlier.
Right. So it's really nice because they're able to get density on the site, make the plan go, but have a sort of somewhat delicate reuse of the existing space, and then you get a hockey rink. I mean, that's
skating.
It's better than festive candle stores, that have been proposed for all these years.
Right. Sure.
As something that Minnesotans use in the train shed. And it's just a thrill for me to see the roof finally coming off that train shed. And
I'm glad you mentioned that because in our research for the show, we found out that truss that's there, which if viewers go down there right now in this winter of the year 2000, you can see that remarkable truss there because the old plywood replacement roof has been lifted off. That's one of only 5 trusses like it, I hear, in the country.
Yep. 10 years ago, it was one of 6.
Oh, so we lost one.
So,
okay.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
And it's really been a long, hard battle for that. I actually initiated the process to get the building on the National Register, so I have a little bit of a personal investment.
You do, indeed.
No. It was. They wanted to tear it down because it was a blight. Number one, that always happens, and number 2, they wanted to angle an elevated road across there to hook up with the 3rd Avenue Bridge and move traffic faster. So it was really endangered.
And the shed was in the way of that?
The depot was in the way of
that. The depot itself? Oh.
Right.
So they were going to be
They were going to cut the corner. And so...
Okay. Now you did that in your role as a
well,
private
I was
citizen?
working in City Hall, actually, at the time as an aide to a city council member. So
okay. So thanks to that
way
role...
Way back then. I mean, somebody else would have done it, but, it happened. And
how'd you become a reporter?
Well, I was going to be a Russian historian, and all the jobs got taken, so I decided to. What was I going to do?
What was next on the list after Russian?
And I'd always been interested in historic preservation. I'd always been interested in writing, so I combined the two, and it worked.
Is that what you trained to do? Is that what you went to school to do?
To be a Russian historian.
Russian historian. Okay. Do you still keep your hand in that?
Not too much.
Okay. Is there a Russian Minneapolis connection of any type?
For me?
Well, just in general.
Well, there are several groups that have strong ties and are helping the Russians kind of.
Well, I know we're getting far afield, but I just found that interesting to go from Russian interest to the urban environment.
The key is that I was going to write my dissertation. I was reading microfilm in the sub-basement of Wilson Library, and I figured, let's see, if I'm lucky, 3 people will read this, and it'll take me 9 years to do. And when I wrote an article for the paper on Minnesota's architectural gems, I could hear, I woke up that morning, it was May, and I could hear it slapping against my front stoop, and I said, that's happening all over the city. This is much better.
Right now, tens of thousands of people can read somebody's comments. That's great. Well, let's get back to this part of downtown. Just a general impression. When you wake up in the morning and you hear that paper slapping against your stoop out there, if the first thing that comes to your mind is, that part of downtown, and you work essentially in this part of downtown.
Right among those surface parking lots.
That's right.
yes.
There's one of the few buildings on that map. What's your general impression? What do you think? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Do you like
Well,
what you see that's going on?
Now I'm hopeful. I was just doing research for this article that was in the paper on Sunday on the Guthrie's likely move to the riverfront. And it was amazing to hear Joan Campbell of the City Council and Dick Victor of the MCDA say, in 5 years, this will all be filled in. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It has been, 25 years of dogged effort to get what's happened, and various kind of fitful starts. But there are housing proposals out across from the depot, right across from here. There's housing and commercial proposals for the rest of the Washburn Crosby Mill that the Minnesota Historical Society isn't going to be using. And I mean, if the Guthrie goes there, I mean, it's phenomenal.
What do you think of the Guthrie as a new resident in this area?
Fabulous.
Fabulous? Yeah. For both their own purposes and in terms of city building, you think that's a good thing?
Yep. I mean, I actually thought there was the parade site, had some wonderful things, and it's a great area for them to be. Here, their presence adds just, a huge kind of public. The public already knows the Guthrie.
Yeah.
And if the Guthrie moves here, the public will come here. And so these efforts like the Minnesota Historical Society and the Park Board to get the Milburns Park going and the Heritage Center in the Washburn Crosby complex just get such a jump. Because they don't have to sort of start from scratch. And it's a great use for they need a lot of land. There isn't that much land in the city. Here you can kind of put a big building because the blocks are already fairly big without having to close streets or
having the
disrupt
Guthrie
neighborhoods.
take that kind of space, though, what does it mean for a stadium?
Well, it may not go there.
Yeah, because that eats up
Crying
a lot
in
of
my
the
soup. I'm
available,
sorry.
Yeah.
That needs a lot of land, and that's it's a problem.
Yeah.
And it's a problem now because there aren't really the stadium takes 4 square blocks.
Yeah.
That's
Guthrie
a
takes
heck
a
of a
good
lot
half
of
of
land.
that anyhow.
Yeah. So where do you find 4 square blocks now? Not so easy.
Well, Linda, I want to thank you for being on and just sharing a few of your impressions. In a word, things are looking good.
It's going to be fun to see a new neighborhood growing up there.
Sounds good. Linda Mack, thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Nice to have you on
Good
the
to
show.
see you.
Now, in a moment, we're going to talk with Carletta Scott. She's both a resident downtown and she works downtown, and she's going to tell us what it is about this part of town that she likes. But first, we have a very interesting feature, Did You Know? And it has something to do with Washington Avenue. Stay tuned, and I'll be back to talk about that.
Big coffee drinker, but I have been here on occasion.
Same here. And we're back, and I just found that fascinating about that young girl's homesickness and how Washington Avenue got its name. And by the way she actually created the sign, she heated up a 2-pronged pitchfork to red hot heat and then burned that into a piece of wood, which became the first street sign in what's now Minneapolis. I thought that was interesting. With me now is another person who lives in the area, Carletta Sweet. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Phil, for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, and you both live in this area and you work in the downtown Minneapolis area. Is that right?
That is correct.
Right. Now, just to orient our viewers, because we've been doing this kind of throughout the whole show, when you're describing to friends, or especially maybe people that don't live here, maybe come to visit, how do you describe to them where you live?
I tell them that I live in what is referred to as the Industry Square area, which is by the riverfront, and it's basically anything west of Washington Avenue and between 3rd Avenue South and 5th Avenue South.
Now, in my mind, that's not the answer you get from just the average citizen. That could say, okay,
no.
Here are the boundaries of Industry Square. You also have been, volunteering, I'm assuming, with what's called the Industry Square Project Committee?
Yes, I sit on a citizens advisory committee called the Industry Square Project Committee. And basically, we get together every other month on Wednesdays to review all of the projects that are being proposed for the development area.
Okay, which is roughly that area you're talking about, although it stretches what?
It
South
stretches,
of Washington as
it
well.
certainly does. I was primarily giving you the area that I reside.
And you call home.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Sure. So Industry Square really is a project area that the city's identified as an area that they'd like to bring projects to.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Development, residential, commercial, and now more recently, cultural developments as well.
A lot of that is starting to come in some big projects.
Exactly. The Mill Ruins Park and Heritage Center is being constructed on West River Road, and that's going to feature educational programs that will highlight the lumber and mills heritage of Minneapolis and other educational programs. So that's a very exciting project that is coming to the area. We have an additional cultural activity is the recently proposed relocation of the Guthrie Theater to the area. So yes.
Pretty exciting, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, with the open book on Washington, the Guthrie, and some of these other things with the archaeology, the history, people are going to be able to come down here and enjoy themselves along those lines. What did you think about maybe the stadium coming in?
I wasn't very thrilled about that. I thought that with the Metrodome, there was already enough activity on a sports level, and so I was looking more for residential and cultural activities coming to the area.
Okay. Now, how long have you lived right in here? And we should point out that you live really right along the river.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I've been here since 1991. I was transferred from the Chicago area, and I discovered the Industry Square area. I became thrilled with it, and I heard about all of the proposed development, and I decided that this was an area I could be committed to staying in.
And so the point you were making is that by being transferred here and your company is in the business district here.
Of course, the proximity to the core area where I work was definitely an added feature for locating to this area.
Now, I happen to work actually pretty much across the street from where you live, so I'm down in the same area, and I've always felt kind of good that my commute is only about 20 minutes.
Exactly,
And I live
exactly.
down near the Uptown area, a little east of there. Your commute is what, by foot?
Exactly, by foot. On a day such as today, I probably would take the Skyway, but it still would average about a 20-minute commute from door to door.
And no parking hassles.
No parking hassles at all. In fact, I don't own a car because
Is that right?
I'm located to so many services in the area. There's no need for it. So.
Now, 9 years ago, this area was a little more
Industrial.
empty and industrial. And as a single woman, was that a problem? I mean, were you at all apprehensive? Or?
No, not at all, because I still considered being close to the downtown core and to the theater district, and so I didn't have far to go to have my services performed, and I was willing to wait and see if the developments that were proposed would actually come to the area. And since I have plenty of evidence that it's here, it has arrived, then I'm thrilled to stay here.
Right.
So.
And it's particularly as they're taking the forms that you were hoping they would with the culture and that sort of thing. That's really good. Let's shift over a little bit to the Industry Square Project Committee.
Yes.
Now, as a citizen, you volunteered for this? What motivated you to do that? Take a little of your personal time?
When I came to the area, I wanted to become more informed about the community. I wanted to increase my knowledge of the area, and in order to do so, one needed to become a part of some type of committee that dealt with the projects that were coming online. So late 93, early 94, I joined Industry Square to keep abreast of all of the activity that was occurring in the area.
Was it a busier deal than you thought it would be?
No, not really. I presume that if development was coming to the area, this would be a serious time commitment on my part to review these projects. And as I mentioned probably before, we meet every other month for a couple of hours and we review these projects. So I think that's a sufficient amount of time commitment for something that is going to affect your community.
Oh, yeah, and I want to get into some of those individual projects, but we should point out too that the folks that are on the committee are private citizens such as yourself and also public officials, is that right?
Well, primarily the committee is comprised of residents and business owners of the area.
Okay. And then with some staff representation from the
Exactly.
city? Okay.
Staff from Minneapolis Community Development.
Which I should point out is where I work, but I wanted to be clear that there's sort of a public-private relationship that's,
Of course,
that's built into that.
of course.
But what about some of these things that you've taken a look at? I know we talked earlier, you and I, about the Red Cross building, which is built down there, or underway actually, along the parkway.
Currently
you
under
took a look
construction.
at that?
Yes, we did. Anything that has occurred or is occurring in this area, our committee has reviewed it.
Okay, so what kind of criteria, or is it more of a subjective kind of a look that you ask questions of the developer or the proposer, or what?
Well, what are their long-range plans? Whether or not they're going to bring employment to the area, whether it's a benefit to the community as a whole. Yes, there's numerous criteria that's applied.
Parking an issue?
Without a doubt.
All the time.
Of course. Well, as you know, this area has nothing but parking, or there's parking all along Second Street.
It's a sea of parking lots. Yeah.
And so once these projects come on stream, you have to accommodate the loss of the parking by, obtaining it elsewhere. So yes, how will these projects replace that parking once they erect their structure or their facility?
Of the various projects that you've had the chance to review, and I'm thinking of you more as an individual, not the whole committee, because I don't know that you can speak for it, what are your favorites? What are you most excited about that's happening in this part of downtown Minneapolis?
What is happening that I'm most excited about?
Yeah.
I believe right now I'm most excited about the residential property that's coming to the area. Despite the fact that most of what is occurring along the river tends to be at the upper end, come level stream, I am very excited about the proposals for more moderate and affordable housing that will be coming to the area as well. So I would consider residential development as one of the more exciting projects coming to the area.
As that housing is developed, and I'd be curious in your response as a resident who already lives here, do you feel that it is a neighborhood now, or that it will become a neighborhood as more of these housing units are put in?
I feel that, since I also belong to the Downtown Minneapolis Neighborhood Association, I definitely feel there's a neighborhood, a community. But I feel that there's a lot more to be developed in this respect as far as cultivating a neighborhood atmosphere.
Right, and maybe bringing some of the amenities of a neighborhood in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Once these educational and cultural facilities arrive as well, they will be supporting each other.
Absolutely. And I do think also what would be upriver, sort of north of Hennepin, there's a lot of housing up there, and the part that you're living in is really just starting to enjoy the new housing that's coming in here.
Oh yes, there's just numerous development going along the river and north, the warehouse district, and we all currently sit on a joint neighborhood association, so perhaps when development increases to a certain level, we might break off, but right now we consider ourselves the downtown neighborhood.
This is it.
This
You're part
is
of
it.
it.
This is it for right now. So.
Well, Carletta, we have just a minute left, but I wanted to ask you this question. For our viewers, why should they be excited about this part of Minneapolis? What's in it for them? And you've listed a few things, but if you could just say to people, hey, this is a great part of town because... What?
Well, it's a thriving community. There's a lot of development going on. If you're interested in seeing more development, residential, commercial, educational, this would be the community for you to pursue as a place to live and work, and will even be more lively once these other projects come on stream. So
Sounds good. Sounds like there's a future here.
it's definitely one for me, so I would strongly recommend it for other people who are looking for a new place to live.
That's great. Carletta Sweet, thank you very much. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Phil, for having me.
Pleasure. Now, we're going to go get a few answers to our monthly what the heck question. These will be the wrong answers. Stay tuned. We'll come back with the right answer after this.
As far as I can tell, it's the front of a building. That's about all I know. I don't know. Old downtown building with cute little people on top. That's all I know.
Perhaps it's the front of the Milwaukee Road Depot in its glory days. Maybe.
Looks like a Coliseum-esque type, I don't know, pavilion, maybe where they play sports in Rome. I'm not sure.
I think that's the Armory building downtown Minneapolis, rebuilt with some Neo-Greek statues on it. That's what I think it is.
This a building, I don't know.
Looks like some sort of sports arena, something related to sports, and it looks like it would be somewhere downtown by the river, in the warehouse district.
Well, my best guess is that the sculptures on the front celebrate labor in some manner or another, so I would think that it was a decorated but now dilapidated factory, from what I can tell by the punctures in the window and the glass. That's about as much as I could tell you.
I think it's an old station. Maybe a train station or something.
Wow, that looks like an old warehouse. An old library. I don't know what it is.
Hi, my name is Bob Roscoe. I'm a commissioner on the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. The building we see in back of us was designed in 1914 by the architects Hewitt and Brown. The sculptor who designed 3 sculptural elements on the roof, John Carl Daniels, designed these sculptures to represent the evolution in milling industry. The central figure represents the modern milling methods as they were then, and the figures on both sides represent more primitive milling methods.
Well, thanks, Bob. Nice to get the inside scoop on those sculptures. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of Inside Minneapolis. At the end of the show, we always run a catalog of useful resources, and we always put an interesting picture alongside it. This time, we were talking earlier in the show about the old depot, and that's the image you'll see alongside the catalog of resources. Also, at the end of the show, with the credits, we've got a nice image of the old Cataract House Hotel. That was along Washington Avenue about, 100 and some years ago. So I hope you enjoyed this edition. Next month, we'll take a look at another interesting feature about Minneapolis. We'll see you next time. I'm Phill Lindsay.